As I've said previously, formatics concerns the format of running a show. Clocks, formatics, and ultimately show prep together can be quite a daunting task if it's the first time that you're doing it. So if we start with show formatics specifically and how to place and plan content for a radio show, we're going to look at in-link or talk break formats. So show formatics is about the how and the why we create certain content and where that content is best placed within an hour. So to do this, we need to use a clock. A clock is a visual representation of the elements in an hour of radio that can help a broadcaster, that can help you follow the running order of the show. Okay, so here in front of you right now is an example of a clock by Radio I Love It. It's broken up into time markers and then color coordinated to reflect specific segments of types of content. So you'll see it starts with the top of the hour, 1/2 past, 1:45. Okay, they've worked in the news at the top hour, top and bottom of the hour. They've included voice links, advertising segments. They have 4 there. Music sweep, so 3 songs. So a clock should include all the segments that go into an hour of radio, which are as follows. So the advertising breaks, the talk links, all music, all utilities, and imaging. Okay, so in this clock, there's your ad breaks. So your 4 ad breaks here, talk links, music. So they haven't put in the utilities and the imaging, except for news. So they haven't put in anything else except for news, but the imaging would be worked in here between the songs. But the imaging would also be worked in here. So when I say advertising breaks, that means your commercials and your live reads. What else except for news will fall under utilities? What else can we place here that's under utilities? Things like the weather would also be in here, the traffic would be in here, and sport, okay, top and bottom of the hour. And if I say imaging, what would you say it falls under imaging of a radio station? They're branding, right? So jingles. And where would we place those jingles? Where would you put jingles in here? In between songs? If there are 3 songs playing, I would definitely play 2 jingles. So if we look at a clock, every single radio station should have a style guide and clocks for every hour of the day. These need to include all the detail and segments from this slide, okay? So all your ad breaks, your talk links, your music, your utilities, and your imaging. If a show doesn't have a clock and you need to start compiling this clock now, you should start by asking the following questions. What time of day is the show? Because that would make a difference, right? If you remember what we said about when we looked at a clock for breakfast show, there's a difference in the styles of the clock for breakfast show versus the daytime versus nighttime versus weekend shows. For whom is the show? Okay, so who's your audience? What are they doing at this time that you are preparing this clock? What is the predominant value proposition of the show? And what problem will the show solve? What are we trying to do with the show? What is the predominant value proposition of the show? In other words, what do you want the show to be known for? And then what problem will the show solve? Once you have a thorough understanding of the show's proposition, you can begin to construct a clock for the show. Plan your clock in a systematic way that will give you a full visual representation of a 1-hour show. So if you're designing a 7 to 8 o'clock clock, you'll start by putting in the news, the sport, the traffic, the weather first. Okay, so all the utilities first. Then you put in your ad breaks, whether it's 3 or 4. Before every break, you put in a talk link. Why do you do that? Why before every break put in a talk link? This is to make sure that listeners listen. This is to make sure that listeners listen to and engage with the advertisement. If we talk before the advertisement breaks, We could say what is coming up after the break, which will encourage the listener to listen to the advertisement in order to get the enticing piece of content. So it's important that you talk before an ad break. Next, in music radio, place the music in the predefined order according to the music policy. So whether it's a case of the first song after a link needs to be a top 40 song, followed by, I don't know, a recurrent song, or it needs to be a gold song, whatever it might be. You work according to your music policy there. And then lastly, you put in the remaining talk links. Before you move on to the link formatics, start by going back to what we spoke about previously to look at the types of content that are required to fill up talk breaks and links, okay? Because we said at different stages of the life cycle plan, there's different things that you would need to include. Do you remember that? Do you remember we spoke about all of that in detail, and we broke it down according to how long your show has also been? So if it was a new show, there was a lot more formatics. So there was a lot more talking about the station itself and a lot less about your opinions. And it was a defined show that changed. So that's all very important things that you need to know when you start putting in the remaining talk links. Also, is it games that you're putting in? Is it what type of, is it a feature? What is it that you're putting in there in the talk links? Okay, it comes back to this question: what time of day is the show? For whom is the show? What are they doing at this time? What problem will you solve? Okay. Now we're going to look a little bit more in detail at link formatics. When we refer to a link, we refer to the spoken time between when a microphone is switched on to when a microphone is switched off. This is also called a voice break or a talk segment, okay? But it would mostly be referred to as a link. A link in a podcast, uninterrupted by advertising or music, could take up the entire podcast, literally. In talk radio, it could be a 10-minute segment between advertising, or in music radio, a 30-second talk break between songs. The most critical part of any link is first to define the function of the link. Okay, the most critical part of any link is first to define the function of the link. In the current world of diversity in respect to audio and visual content space, audiences are spoiled with choices. And apply a strict time-starved criterion to what they are listening to. So audiences have more than enough choices of what they want to listen to, but not enough time to listen to it all. If the link is of no value, think about yourself. If the link that you are listening to is of no value, what are you going to do? You're either going to very quickly, without giving it much thought, move on to if the link is of no value to you, you're very quickly going to, without even thinking about it, move on to another piece of content. That's what I would do. How would a listener do this? By either switching manually to another piece of content, which means on another radio station, or digital, or on TV, or whatever it might be, or mentally zooming out of the conversation. Okay. This means that every time a microphone is turned on in a radio or a podcast studio, the creator of the content has to remind themselves that this link or this piece of information must hold value to the audience. It therefore has to be emotive and solve the needs of the audience. So in the olden days, the old school time and temperature links, do you think they will work today? No, they will hold little or no value in today's radio landscape. Why? Because many years ago, it would have been acceptable to simply tell the listener the time, the weather forecast, the name of the song that they're about to play. These days, however, we can see the time. Like, I can read the weather on my phone immediately when I wake up. Even when it comes to music, we can stream or download whatever we want to listen to. I can just put on iTunes or Spotify, and I can find whatever it was that I want to hear. So you as a radio presenter have to offer more. Okay, there needs to be more to you than the weather and the time, or you're not going to make it. There needs to be more to you than the weather and the time. You have to compete. You have to compete for attention with every other platform that provides valuable content. This is why a link should be broken up into two categories. So a link should either be a promise or a performance. That is it. A link can only be a performance or a promise. What is a promise? Let's start there. A promise, in the radio sense of the word, is also called a tease or a throw forward. And I'm sure you must have heard that because I speak of a tease a lot. It promises the listener that what they're about to listen to is going to be of value to them and that they should stay tuned for it and for its content. The promise finds the emotive hook in the link or piece of content, or finds information about that song that is coming up and sells that piece to the audience. A promise is not merely about informing the listener about the name of the feature or the song or the piece of content that's coming up. It's not a shopping list of things that the listener will soon hear. Instead, it is a deliberately constructed piece of content that sells the next part of the content to a listener. And its job is to purposefully convince the listener that they should stay tuned in for this next piece. To achieve this, imagine a listener telling a presenter, "I will continue listening to you if you can promise me that what I'm about to hear will be worth my while." The promise would be the response to this request and this statement, in which you explain the value to the listener. Promises should be planned similar to any other creative, entertaining link. Practically, this could mean playing a small snippet of a prank, playing the opening of a hilarious pre-produced performance, or playing a snippet of a song. Okay, so that's the first one. That's a promise. What is a performance on the other side? What is a performance on the other hand? So performance is the link that the promise was building up toward. You now have the listener's attention and you have to make the opportunity worth the listener's while because now they are listening to you. What will make this performance worthwhile now? If I've now tuned in, what will make it worthwhile for me? What makes a performance worthwhile is that it is emotive, okay? There are emotions involved. In other words, it should make the listener feel something or engage with them on an emotional level. A good performance can make the listeners feel a range of different emotions. However, it's easy to fool yourself as a presenter into thinking that a piece or a link is truly emotive when it's not. So applying a strong and harsh metrics to a piece, along with an objective understanding of what makes your listeners tick and what would really get them to feel is enormously important. Good radio stations utilize qualitative research in order to help inform these decisions. Presenters might have heard that a good performance is one that is either relevant or relatable. However, a piece of content will be both of these things, so both relevant and relatable if it has moved the listeners emotively, okay? If a listener doesn't feel anything after listening to an audio piece, then that piece has been neither relevant or relatable. Neither relevant nor relatable. However, it's very difficult to feel anything towards something to which you can't relate. So if you don't relate to a topic or to a subject, you're not easily going to get an emotion out of it. So if a listener is moved emotively, they probably found the piece relatable and relevant to their lives. Again, think about yourself as a listener. So different emotions carry different weighting and fall into specific orders of importance. The first thing you should try and do is to make listeners feel happy. Okay, so in other words, you must try to delight the audience, or you should make them smile or make them laugh. Next, you should also try to surprise or to create moments of sadness. At other times, evoking emotions of disgust or fear would offer a fuller range of emotional repertoire. However, a presenter should never anger. A presenter should never anger listeners. Okay, rather allow other characters or callers to evoke that kind of a negative emotion. What is the problem here? Why should you as a presenter never anger listeners? The presenter that angers will eventually have to be killed off and dismissed from the radio station. Therefore, be careful of anger as an emotional response. Rather, if other characters have evoked anger, be able to quickly remove them. So, for example, if it's a caller, you can quickly remove the caller from air in order to come to the rescue of your listeners. In other words, when it comes to an emotional response, when it comes to certain emotional responses, control of the situation is essential. So now, once you've decided on the type of link that you would like to create, you can then plan the content of this link and how you're going to execute it. So let's look at the how. Radio's greatest strength is that it is a medium. Radio's greatest strength is that it is a medium in which the user, or the listener rather, feels like they are being spoken to directly by the presenter. So personal. It's therefore a personal medium in which the presenter and the listeners, are involved in the illusion of a one-on-one conversation. It's only you and me that are speaking. This illusion needs to be maintained at all times. We achieve this by never referring to listeners as a collective, okay? But always talking directly to one listener. How do you do this? How do I only speak with you and not to a lot of different people at the same time? I do this by using singular and personal pronouns. And we avoid the use of collectives when referring to listeners. So an example would be a presenter correctly saying, I hope you had a good day. So an example would be a presenter correctly saying, I hope you had a good day. Instead of I hope you all had a good day. Or I hope everyone listening is having a great day. All right, so I'm talking to you, hopefully I'm talking with you, but I'm talking to you and not to a collective group of people. So start constructing links by relying on such singular pronouns, which will ensure that you keep that illusion, okay? Which is one of radio's greatest assets, because we want to maintain that illusion always. One of the implications of this illusion is that a good presenter will see and maintain links as conversations, okay? You and I are having a conversation, that's what it is. In other words, a good presenter can create the illusion that it is just the presenter and the listener sitting in a car or anywhere that the radio is being listened to, having a conversation about a particular topic. Even when the effective presenter is presenting a piece of constructed content, like a parody or a prank call, they will bring it in or introduce it in such a manner that the listener should think that they are playing this piece of content just for them. Okay, so you're playing it only for me. How will they do that? By having a personal introduction and by having the kind of conversation that you would have with your friend. So by having the type of conversation that you will have with your friend when you're playing your friend a clip or when you're showing your friend something, it's that same kind of conversation. So the same thing can be seen for presenting the name of the song or telling your listeners or the audience what radio station they're listening to. It can even be achieved when telling the audience the time. Okay, it's just about the way that you speak. As long as the information is presented as a conversation, the presenter will be able to relay the content as one would with an acquaintance or a friend. So the conversation style of radio presenting separates the great radio presenters from the mediocre presenters. That's in essence what happens here. Those that can make their listeners feel like they're talking directly to them and not at them. Okay, I'm not talking over your head. Are usually the presenters that have the most success with the medium. So if you can talk one-on-one with me, you'll have the most success. Okay. Why? Because these presenters form personal, emotive relationships with their listeners. Radio presenters must remind themselves of this fact at all times, especially during the preparation of their shows and the links that they are planning to incorporate within that show. Ask yourself, what would this sound like if we were having a normal conversation? Would this make sense to the listener? Is it easy to follow? So with you and me speaking right now, do you think I would speak any differently to you if you were standing right next to me, or if you were a friend of mine, or would we have a similar type of conversation like we are having right now? So that's the kind of things you need to keep in mind. Remember, listening to radio very rarely happens in isolation, okay? It's almost always the case that me as the listener will be doing something else while I'm listening to you on air. So whether it be that I'm driving, whether I'm showering, whether I'm cooking, whether I'm working, I'm doing something else at the same time. Listening to music is processed by the brain in a separate channel than performing foreground tasks, okay, such as reading and writing. Listening to spoken words is also processed by the channel that processes foreground tasks. So music is processed in a separate section of the brain to these foreground tasks, but spoken words are processed in the same area. This is why finding your way in an unfamiliar area while driving in your car is harder if someone is talking to you at the same time. The reason for this is that these two activities are competing for a single channel. This means that you have to engage listeners by using simple and easy to understand conversational language because they are doing something else at the same time. However, there are other techniques that can help grab the listener's attention away from the things that they are currently doing. So there are other things we can do or can look at. Have you ever heard someone speak about a Mexican bicycle, or the Mexican bicycle wheel, or the man on the Mexican bicycle, or the Mexican on the bicycle? So this, you'll have to use your imagination to see this properly, but this diagram represents a man wearing a sombrero and riding a bicycle, okay? So it's known as the Mexican on the bicycle, and it represents the formation of a link. So imagine that the two blue lines there are the bicycle wheels, and that the middle section where it says thought with the two circles is the man with his sombrero that's riding the bicycle, okay? And then on the left side, you see it says, well, it starts at the top, it's saying link. Left side saying obligation, then thought, then obligation fulfilled on the right side. This diagram represents the formation of a link. The idea is that the link starts from the left and moves toward the right. In other words, a link should start with an obligation, which in this case would be we are obliged to tell the listener what they are listening to. So the name of the song they just heard, the name of the radio station, the name of the presenter, or the name of the show. Okay, so an obligation. A way to ensure that this link is successful is to continuously remind the listener what they are listening to. So through it all, you still have to be both entertaining and engaging while continuously reminding the audience of the station that they are tuned into and what they are listening to. This will ensure recall, which is vital. So the obligation is the first thing that the listeners hear when the song comes to an end, or the start of a new topic in a talk segment. The best way to successfully carry across the obligation is to practice answering the following questions repetitively, okay? What is the name and artist of the track that you just played? What is the name of your show? What radio station do you work for? Answering these questions in this order will allow the presenter to start the link in a conversational and very relaxed manner. Similar to how you will start a normal conversation, which is what you want. There's nothing forced or artificial about this approach. So the switch from telling the listener the obligation versus speaking to the listener about what they are listening to is very important, okay? Did you hear that? So what you're doing is you're switching from telling the listener versus speaking to the listener about what it is. So what have you done there? You've made a subtle but significant difference in the listener's perception of the presenter. Once the obligation is complete, the listener can move on to the main purpose of the link, which is the actual content, okay? And that's the one thought rule. And this is where this Mexican on a bicycle helps also. The Mexican on the bicycle is meant to help remind a presenter that they should always look at keeping the link as simple as possible, okay? This can be maintained by using the one thought rule. You should have also heard about KISS by now, so keep it simple, stupid. So keep it simple. Every piece of content should be centered around one thought, one idea, one theme. For example, a presenter would like to talk about the Academy Awards or the Golden Globes or whatever it might be, and who's on the red carpet at the awards. So the link and its content should be structured around this topic. The presenter shouldn't switch from chatting about the red carpet, then jump to another red carpet event at another awards show, followed by a story from their high school film awards. What do you do while listening to radio? You do other things at the same time, okay? So you're distracted. You're probably doing something else. So you're listening with one ear to the link, okay? You can't demand attention if the link is confusing and all over the place. If your link is confusing to understand, there's no way you're going to get that attention that you want. The one thought principle helps to remind a presenter that keeping it simple is the best way to retain and to attract and retain listeners, okay? So you want to keep it as simple and as easy as possible using the one thought rule. There are 5 rules of storytelling, and that's what we're going to start the next lesson on, okay? So this is where we'll end this lesson. Did you see what I just did? I just did a throw forward for you about what's coming up. Okay, so what's coming up is the 5 rules of storytelling. So today what we looked at, again, just in a nutshell, is a clock. Okay, so we looked at creating a clock, which you should know quite well by now. So in your clock, you will place your advertising breaks, i.e. commercials and libraries, your talk links, any and all musics, or any and all songs, all utilities, and with utilities we mean news, sport, weather, traffic, that kind of stuff. And then your imaging, aka jingles or sweeps, which you will add to the songs. We said when creating a clock, you need to ask what time of the day is the show, for whom is the show, what are they doing at this time, what is the predominant value proposition of the show, and what problem are we trying to solve with this show, okay? Then we spoke about a link. What is a link? A link is the spoken time between when the microphone is switched on to when it is switched off. That is a link. And then we looked at the only 2 types of links that we get. One is a promise link, one is a performance link. At the promise link, which is also called a tease or a throw forward, we promise the listener that if they tune in, they will hear something that is of value to them. So that's why they need to stay and listen to us. And at the performance link, we are making good on our promise. Okay, so here we are now giving them the link that we promised that we were building up towards in the promise. And then we briefly spoke about the Mexican on the bicycle, which represents one thought per link. And that is then the end of this lecture for today. Okay, we will continue with creating content in chapter 4 in our next lesson. And with that, I say goodbye for now.